You're not afraid of a little space-time continuum meddling, are you, cadet? No, I thought not. Shall we?
It's a common theme in storytelling that the more something is explored, the less interesting it becomes. The Borg, for example, started as an unstoppable force of terror, only to be diluted by overuse in Voyager. However, one entity that has mostly avoided this fate is the Q. Sure, there have been some ups and downs, but their history remains one of curiosity and unpredictability. Let's just get into it.
At the beginning of the new era, life as a Q was a constant dialogue of discovery and issues and humor from all over the universe.
We don't know much about the history of the Q, but we do know that they didn't always exist as a godlike being. They started as something more mortal. Their exact origins remain unclear, though some theories suggest they were once human, or at least something strikingly similar. It's a compelling idea, but without definitive proof, we're left with the speculation. What we do know is that at some point, they ascended to a higher state of existence, becoming beings of thought, light, or something. From this point, things get confusing.
The road takes us to the rest of the universe, then it leads back here. An endless circle.
The Q are time travelers experiencing existence without a clear beginning or end, yet they don't seem to suffer from the same paradoxical limitations as the prophets. They understand time but are not bound by it. Interestingly, despite their supposed omnipotence, we have evidence that they still use technology in some form.
They may be humanoids, but they're using our weapons.
How much of their reality warping power is truly innate, and how much is assisted by technology, it's unclear. In some of my older videos, I have argued that Trelane might have been a proto-Q, perhaps even an early version of one still reliant on devices to manifest his abilities. I still stand by that theory. Maybe I'll even do a video about whether Trelane is the child of John Delancey's Q. We'll have to see.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We call ourselves the Q. Well, thou mates call me that.
While the Q might have been active before the 24th century, we only start to see their direct involvement with humanity when a rogue Q develops a peculiar fascination with humans. Some argue this was part of a grander test for the species, preparing them for greatness. Others suggest it was just because Q was bored. Either way, his engagement with Captain Jean-Luc Picard would alter humanity's trajectory. And Picard was an interesting choice, one of the best captains in Starfleet, if you ignore the fact that he doesn't think combat is necessary and openly mocks U.S. soldier uniforms.
Actually, the issue at stake is patriotism. You must return to your world and put an end to the commies. All it takes are a few good men.
What? That nonsense is centuries behind us.
But you can't deny that you're still a dangerous, savage child race.
Most certainly I deny it. I agree we still were when humans wore costumes like that.
Regardless, Q declared that humanity would be tested. Whether this was ever truly the case remains debatable. I almost prefer the idea that it wasn't. That what started as a game for Q slowly became something far more serious. One of the most significant turning points in the Q's relationship with humanity came during the indirect involvement with the Borg. Before we dive into that, let me bring up an older video so that we can get a brief explanation.
Uploading.
We have to analyze the history of the Elorians. Yeah, the Elorians. They once held a powerful civilization with a pretty large swath of territory. They were an empathetic, likely telepathic race that were so sophisticated they were considered a substantial threat to those like the Q. In fact, the Q and the Elorians were part of some form of Cold War for, well, the longest of times. I know some will think that this is a pretty silly idea because it came from Star Trek Picard, but honestly, I've been talking about this and likely a Cold War, if not a war itself, between the Q and the Elorians since the Next Generation, long before Star Trek Picard was even a thought. By the way, you're welcome for the idea, Star Trek room writers. We don't know what would have happened with the Q and the Elorians if the Cold War had ever went hot, but we do know that a peace agreement came between the two and stopped this near-destructive chapter in its infancy. After that, I theorized that the Q were probably pretty comfortable in their status. They felt like they owned the universe. And that would be until the Borg assimilated the Elorians. And it would be at this point that the collective, now holding the knowledge and power of all Elorians, would become a threat. I've argued before that the Q and the Borg feared each other. Some disagree, but I still stand by that theory. Regardless of where you land on the debate, it's undeniable that a confrontation between an Elorian and a Q led to humanity's first direct encounter with the Borg. From this point forward, the Q's attitude toward humanity shifted. No longer content with simple playing games, they became more deliberate in their actions. They transitioned from cosmic tricksters running bizarre social experiments, like putting humanity on trial or granting godhood to random officers, into something more structured, more mature. It could also have something to do with how good of a boxer Sisko is. Whatever the reason, the Q began focusing on individual humans, taking an active interest in them. This in turn led to an internal shift within the Continuum.
You gave us something to talk about. Well, then you surrendered to the will of the Continuum like a good little Q. And may I say, you've become a fine, upstanding member of the Continuum. But I miss the irrepressible Q. The one who forced me to think.
Once you've left everything, what's left to do? That was the problem the Q faced. While some theorized that they were once universal guardians maintaining balance across time and space, at some point their purpose faded. They became stagnant, immortal beings who had seen and done everything to the point that existence itself became, well, meaningless. So, when one Q started causing trouble, the Continuum responded harshly. After all, why disrupt the stillness? They had already conquered time and reality. There was no reason to stir the pot. This suppression of individuality had consequences. Another Q, disillusioned with their eternal existence, made the unprecedented decision to seek mortality. The Continuum, unsurprisingly, did not take this well. His actions inspired others, including the very Q who had once been silenced. And so, for the first time in recorded history, the Continuum fell into civil war. The war was fought between two factions, those who embraced individualism and change versus those who clung to the status quo. The conflict was so destructive that it didn't just threaten the Q, it had the potential to unravel reality itself. I've covered this war in depth before, but I might do a deeper dive into the politics behind it sometime. Maybe a members-only video, we'll see. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that the war had consequences far beyond what was shown on screen. I've even theorized that it played a role in the destruction of the Romulan star. If you're curious, check that out at your convenience. Ultimately, the war ended in the only way it could, with the creation of new life. Because, apparently, sex fixes everything.
Oh, I love it when you talk dirty.
Why don't I give you two some privacy?
Oh, Kathy, don't you like to watch?
The birth of a child would bring the Q Continuum back together, ending the Civil War. But as with all things Q, solving one problem only created new ones. Problems I'll be saving for a members-only video. With the Continuum reunited, the Q seemingly faded into the background. Perhaps they resumed their role as cosmic guardians, maintaining the delicate balance of the universe. Or maybe, after everything, they simply fell back into stagnation, their existence once again void of purpose. Of course, Paramount has been particularly hostile when it comes to using footage from all the newer Star Trek shows. So, to ensure you actually get to watch this video in a reasonable time frame, I'll save my full breakdown of what happened next for a separate video, after I've talked to Paramount or discussed how fair use works. If you enjoyed this video and want to see exclusive supplementary content, consider becoming a YouTube member for as little as $1. You'll get early access to videos, if I plan to do them, behind the scenes content, and deeper dives into the lore. But let's keep the conversation going on this one. What do you think happened to the Q? Did they truly stagnate, or is there something more we haven't seen yet? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.